Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lecture 2. Don't forget that as part of this lecture, you should be completing your DWP. It really kind of depends on how you want to do it. Some people will do it during the lecture, some people will do it after the lecture, or all at the very end. Regardless, though, it is due on Tuesday, March 4th, so just make sure that you are completing it. Now, last time that we did our lecture, we finished on social Darwinism, which would have been potentially cause for or historical context, depending kind of on which way that you go. But now we're heading into one of the most important topics of this entire page, which is the Spanish American War. If you'll make sure to add a number 5, and remember we're circling all of the major causes or examples of America expanding its role in the world. And again, go ahead and make this one number 5. Now, we're going to go ahead and highlight, by the way, in triple star, the Spanish American War. It's probably one of the most important, if not the most important, cause or example of America expanding its role in the world. Now, to understand the Spanish American War, we have to understand why America went into the Spanish American War. And this really had to do with Cuba. If you will go to the first sub bullet and highlight the word Cuba. Now, in Cuba, Cuba had something that America really wanted. And in particular, it was any plantations, but especially, if you will highlight, sugar cane plantations. And America really wanted to be able to invest in it, but there's a problem. This specific location is being controlled by the Spanish at this time. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to get this to stop. It's being controlled by the Spanish at this time. And so America has a problem, and they really want to be able to get rid of the Spanish in Cuba. Well, what happens is that the Cubans begin to rebel against their country, so against Spain, and Spain sends this guy to go and handle the problem. Now, if you ask me, when you look at this guy, he reminds me a lot of Sherman, and they're going to act very similarly in terms of the fact that they say war is cruel. The crueler it is, the faster that it will be over. However, his version of cruel is horrific compared to General Sherman. Make sure, by the way, on the second sub bullet that you highlight Cubans' attempted independence. So, what he does is that he begins to create what are called, if you will highlight in the next bullet, reconcentration areas. And these reconcentration areas are essentially concentration camps. In fact, if you compared these to the Nazi Holocaust, you would find a lot of similarities between the two. It was horrific. This is what's called emaciation, which is where your body has run out of so much food that it begins to actually eat your flesh and eat your fat and eat your muscle and your bones. And at this point, essentially, these are horrific cases of massive, cruel, and inhumane things happening against the Cubans. As you can see in here with the amount of dead in Cuba at these reconcentration camps. The massacre was horrific of the Spanish trying to stop the Cuban independence movement. If I remember correctly, I believe it's 1/3 of all people died in these reconcentration camps. And just let you know, it was men, women, and children. It was of all ages, as you saw in that last one. Now, America begins to do something really interesting, and it's a concept known as yellow journalism. If you will highlight and triple star or double star yellow journalism in the next bullet. Some would even argue that this could potentially even be a cause of why America begins to go into war and in general into the issues during the imperialist era. Now, we have really big publishers at this point. We have William Hearst on the left and Joseph Pulitzer on the right. Now, you've probably heard of Joseph Pulitzer because the Pulitzer Prize. Yes, this is that Pulitzer. But little trivia here, where else have you heard Hearst and Pulitzer, you Disney fans out there? You might have seen Newsies. There's this song, and I know you're going to love me singing it, but it goes like, Pulitzer and Hearst, they think they got us. Do they got us? No. That is these two. The Newsies strike was a very real strike, a very progressive era strike, trying to be able to get more rights for the newsboys of New York City. And it was a real event. Maybe not as much singing, but definitely was a real event. But those are where those two names comes from. Now, these two people are actually doing an interesting form of journalism, and we call this kind of yellow journalism today. Yellow journalism is these big, exaggerated headlines. Their goal is to take the smallest, and I say smallest amount of truth because you want to avoid libel laws, and be able to expand it, but get people to buy your stuff. Like you can see in these images, like pregnant and named queen, Blake dumps Gwen, Spoiler alert, they're still together. Cocaine, cheating, and lies, anything to draw you in. Now, one of my favorite examples of this, which I will tell you this, I only go to this website during this lecture. Please do not give them money. That will just encourage them to keep being bad. But there is a news source. I use the word news source very lightly, called Inside the Magic. It is a Disney news source. I wouldn't really call it that. These are basically exaggerated headlines to try to get you to hurry and go and click on it. So if we look at these images, let's see some of the stuff that they've recently posted. Let's see. Disneyland guests flash Nazi salutes, fans blame Elon Musk. This is a story that basically talks about how somebody on Tower of Terror or Guardians of the Galaxy now did the Nazi salute, and they didn't get cleared by the picture, so it popped up, and people are saying Elon Musk is now taking over Disneyland. Most of what they do is they take like one tweet and they make a whole story about it, like you can see here. I like this one a lot. Disneyland turns off public water access for theme park guests. Can you believe that? They took away your water. Well, let's see what that water actually is. So let's go ahead and open it. Let's see. We're just going to scroll down past all the boring parts here. All right, let's see what the actual thing is that turned off. Come on. Okay. Well, it came up yesterday. Oh, here it is. Okay. So they are at Disney's California Adventure, and they noticed, I don't know why it's not pulling up. There it is. This water feature, so this little waterfall, was turned off. Okay. So that's what they're upset about. They said, does anybody know why? And as you can see here, Disneyland turned off their public water access by temporarily turning off a fountain waterfall thing at Disney's California Adventure. Let's see what else we got here. You see Dolly Parton is defunded. That's because, if you don't know, she has a charity where she gives away free books, and one state decided not to continue to fund it, but now she's defunded. Okay. Disney World closes Florida theme park, begins demolition. Well, it's not the whole theme park, it's just part of the theme park. But sure, all right, we'll be able to go with that. Let's see what else. I saw a really, really good one. Hold on. I gotta find it. I found it yesterday. Let's see. Oh, where is it? Okay. Disney World guest horrified when Disney cast member forces his way into her room. Disney does a security check ever since the Mandalay Bay shooting. And he did a security check, and she felt he forced his way. But he knocked on it, and she said that. So forcing that. Multiple episodes censored and banned, missing for every single Disney Plus user. I thought this one was especially interesting when I read it yesterday, because I was scrolling and it talks about this censorship, and it brings up this show called Bear in the Big Blue House. So that is my youngest son's favorite show. He absolutely loves this show. And I was like, oh my goodness, they're censoring it. Why are they censoring it? Why did they take it off of Disney Plus? Apparently there's a licensing issue for some songs, and they took it off. But yeah, censorship. They censored and banned it because there was a licensing issue, etc. I like this one too. Disney will charge adults $209 for meals after finally committing to improving food. This title implies that they're going to charge everybody $209. It's actually a 5-course meal at a Michelin-starred restaurant in France. So you could see that they're trying to get you to click on it. Now, I want you to think trivia, okay? What is this called today? So when we say yellow journalism is big, flashy headlines. What would we call any of the things I just showed you? You can write at the end of this line. We typically call these clickbait, where they're trying to get you to hurry and click on it and get it for you. Hertz and Pulitzer, the reason why they did this is because at this time, there is no other news source except the newspapers. So newspapers typically would publish 9 to 10 articles a day, trying to update you on any information. Well, if it's a slow news day, you're not going to make any money. So they would have these big capturing headlines trying to get you to go and buy these newspapers. Well, that's what they did. They went and took this. Let's see. They went and took this issue going on in Cuba, and they began to yellow journalism. Anything they could do to get people to read their newspapers. So you can see it says, no man's life, no man's property is safe in Cuba. American citizens are imprisoned or slain without cause. American property is destroyed on all sides. Wounded soldiers can be found begging in the streets of Havana. The horrors of a barbarous struggle for the extermination of the native population are witnessed in all parts of the country. This is my favorite part. Blood on the road says, blood in the fields, blood, blood, blood. Is there no nation wise enough, brave enough to aid in this blood smitten land? So, what you notice is in these political cartoons, now, one thing about Puck, you probably have seen Puck several times in this class. Puck was very much like an editorial magazine, had lots of political cartoons. So, most of our political cartoons at this point are going to be from Puck. But again, you'll notice here Spanish misrule. They're over the fire of anarchy. It is our duty of the hour. We must not only save here from Spain, but from a worse fate. Don't let this continue to happen. If you notice here, Lady Liberty, Lady Columbia, she's trying to save the poor Cuban baby, but Uncle Sam, he ain't doing nothing. He's just sitting there all blindfolded up at the top. Judge is another pretty popular cartoonist magazine at this time. Notice again, save me from our friends. Should America go in and save this person away from the bad Cubans and the bad Spanish? Over here as well. Which brings us to the USS Maine, which this is our trigger moment. If you will highlight and double star the USS Maine and put it at the end of this where Spanish it says, go ahead and put the word trigger. Now, our trigger of the Spanish-American War is this ship, which was outside of Cuba. In the port of Havana. Sitting outside in the port of Havana, it exploded from a bomb from the Spanish. And this bomb was so large and so massive that not only did it kill or destroy the ship, but it also killed a significant amount of lives. And people, this was our Pearl Harbor. We're going to the Spanish-American War, and we are going to fight the Spanish because of this explosion. But here's the reality. Now, the U.S. presidency and the U.S. government said that this was the Spanish. The Spanish planted bombs, or they said that there was a ship that went into it and exploded it and made the ship explode. The reality is at the bottom of the USS Maine, there was a large area with magazines. Magazines are like where the drums of the guns are. And these magazines basically had exploded due to overheating, AKA it was a mechanical failure. But do you think that's what they're going to publish in the papers? Nobody cares about mechanical failure. What we care about is the awful, terrible Cubans in Spanish. Notice it says there's a reward of $100,000, that's or $50,000. That's millions of dollars in today's money. Who destroyed the Maine? Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of the enemy. Assistant Secretary Roosevelt, ooh, who's that? Convinced the explosion of the warship was not an accident, and the journal is going to offer $50,000 of reward for the conviction of the criminals who killed 258 American soldiers to their death. Naval officers unanimous that the ship was destroyed on purpose. Well, not exactly. You see, originally, that was the original statement that came out. The original statement was that it was the Spanish, but within 24 hours, the American government actually issued a statement and said that they were wrong. But do you think they care about that? Absolutely not. And instead, we go to war. This yellow journalism is a really good example of a trigger and a cause, convincing you we have to go to war to save and avenge what happened with the USS Maine. This is one of my favorite cartoons when it comes to yellow journalism. So notice you have the devil. Notice you have the rich people just putting in all of this wealth to make it. Notice it's all this yellow journalism, and look at all the people. Oh, yeah, they're eating it up. Eat, 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 eat. The yellow press, again, convincing people to support their claims. So now we're going to go to war with Spain. Now, again, the USS Maine is very similar to what happened over in the Alamo. You can see here, to hell with Spain, remember the Maine, again saying, trying to get them, trying to defeat Spain and getting them to surrender. Now they're going to put a naval commander in charge named George Dewey. And again, America thought this is a naval war, and it pretty much was all throughout the Caribbean and things like that, a naval war. So thinking in your head as a quick reminder, Cuba is the problem, right? Bad things are happening in Cuba. Spain is the country that is causing this problem. So where do you think we're going to attack? How about the Philippines? Right over here, literally 2,000 miles away from either of these locations. Now, this gets into be a really interesting thing about why we're expanding our role. Now, America says we're expanding our role because of what is happening in Cuba, but the reality is America sees this as a pretty good opportunity to get some territories from Spain. Now, the Philippines were really desirous to the Americas. If you gain the Philippines, you gain a really great gateway to pretty much all of Asia. So America sends George Dewey over to the Philippines. They come into the ports and they're ready to fight the Philippines. And they demanded that the mayor come out and come and speak to them, and they tied him up and they said, "You're going to surrender." And he was like, surrender from what? The Philippines hadn't even been told that Spain was in war. They had no idea. So America captures the Philippines, and the Philippines didn't even know that they were at war. And we're going to take control of the Philippines for the next several decades. Even when they gain their freedom, we still have massive control. It kind of shows that America's goal wasn't necessarily Cuba, it wasn't necessarily Spain. It's expanding their role in the world. And it's a really great cartoon for that. Notice that we have over here the Philippines. Notice over here we have Puerto Rico. We're going to talk about that in a second. Notice we are expanding our wings in 1898, 10,000 miles from tip to tip. We are expanding our territory. I do want you to put somewhere in the margins here the number 1898. That is the year where a lot of our imperialism starts, and we expand throughout the world. Now, people did begin to argue, though, why are we acquiring the Philippines? Like, the Philippines aren't even in this war. And if you notice, this is Uncle Sam jailing the Philippines, and they seem, kind of desolate and desperate because they're just taking it over. Even though the Philippines really don't have much to do with the situation at hand. Now, after they take the Philippines, they once again go back into the Caribbean, which is probably where they should have been fighting the whole time, and they begin to go to war with Spain in the war. In the Caribbean. Sorry, I got tripped up because it says Gulf of Mexico, and as of yesterday, it's the Gulf of America. But maps are always changing. Anyways, so we have the war in the Caribbean, and there's a lot of problems with this war. We didn't have a lot of supplies. All the leaders were basically these like Civil War vets who were like 60, 70 years old. They're like, oh, when I was in the Civil War. They also wore wool uniforms in Cuba and the Caribbean. I don't know if you figured that out, but that's probably not a good idea. They didn't even have enough guns. So they actually asked people to bring their own guns to war. America was not really ready to fight in this, but luckily we have a hero, and those are the Rough Riders. And if you notice our boy up here, Teddy Roosevelt, he's going to be the leader of our Rough Riders. Go ahead and highlight both Theodore Roosevelt and our Rough Riders. Now, we kind of really quickly went to it, but Theodore Roosevelt was an outdoorsy guy. He actually had a working cattle ranch with about 600 head of cattle in the West while he was president. Like, he would just leave during the cattle ranching time, like back and forth, because that was his love. He loved the outdoors. He loved nature. He was a hunter, our boy Teddy Roosevelt, teddy bears. And so it makes natural sense for him to get all the cowboys of the West and make them into a cavalry unit, aka a horse unit. So he gets all these Rough Riders as Secretary of the Navy, and they're going to go and fight in this war. It's a quick reminder, Theodore Roosevelt was a huge hit in the U.S. Navy. Literally, he was the boxer. He was the champion boxer, and he is going to go save America during the Spanish-American War. Well, that brings us to a little bit of an interesting story, because as they begin to approach, remember, they're cavalry, they have horses. They have to get all these horses into the beaches of Cuba. So what they do is they take these horses, and they have this little pulley system. They release the pulley system all the way down. They let the horse into the water, and then the horse swims to shore, all good to go. And this worked pretty fine for the cavalrymen until it hit Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt sends his best horse down into the water, and the horse gets confused, turns away, and swims out to the ocean. So then you have the second round. They take the next horse, put him into the ocean. Same thing happens. Third horse, they finally get somebody on top of it, try to steer him in the right way, and the horse, well, went into the propeller. So finally, they had the last horse. They dragged it up, so he has his four-string horse up there to be able to fight. Now, in most battles, your commander sits in the back. They don't really do much, but that's not Teddy Roosevelt. So Teddy Roosevelt got onto his horse, and he led the people up into the Battle of, if you will highlight, San Juan Hill. Now they go up this hill, and they fight thousands of Cubans and thousands of Spanish, and they win the Battle of San Juan Hill, and he becomes a massive celebrity. So much of a celebrity that they actually use this story to create his own comic strip during the 1960s. Now, our boy Teddy Roosevelt continues to be impressionable until today. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to go to the San Diego Zoo with my family. Look how cute we are. And while we were at the San Diego Zoo, which, by the way, this is when I had the chance to be able to see one of my favorite animals. I have two favorite animals, sea otters because of the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California, but also koala bears because they're so adorable. And that's why I love the San Diego Zoo, because they have tons of koala bears. But as we were leaving the San Diego Zoo, I yelled at my husband to stop the car because I saw something that was amazing. Now, unfortunately, what I saw was a school, which was actually the Theodore Roosevelt Middle School, which was super cool. The reason it was a problem, it was a Saturday, it was closed, there was a gate. somebody may have climbed the gate and got onto the concourse. I mean, it's fine, right? They should have built a taller fence. The point is, I was so excited because I saw some really cool things. So your goal is figure out what are some of the secret things that you can find about Theodore Roosevelt at this middle school in California. By the way, this was an IB school. Ooh, that's us. And so I was really excited to see this because, oh, it made me feel like home back in Utah. Now, again, let's look at the mascot here. So the mascots are called the Rough Riders. Hopefully you get the reference there. Notice what animal is the mascot here. Interesting. Teddy Roosevelt. All throughout the entire campus, they actually had all of these bears. Each of the bears was actually modeled after something important with Theodore Roosevelt. This is his imperialist bear, which is the worldwide bear that you can see. But they had all these little teddy bears all throughout the campus. Oh, we should totally have this at Skyline. I don't know. We can't have bears, but maybe a bunch of eagles. Now, they also did this really interesting mosaic where people contributed different parts to the full mosaic. So notice that we have Teddy Roosevelt and the word parks, aka national parks. We have a quote by him. Notice right here we have a bear. Ooh, a bear. And all together, this makes a literal Theodore Roosevelt, which you can see right here. And this picture of Theodore Roosevelt is pretty famous. I believe, if I remember correctly, it's after he was shot and continued his speech. Notice some other things that we noticed too, though. We have these cute little fishies because he's an outdoorsman. This one might be a little bit harder to see, but hopefully you can see the bear right here and you can see the boost. Remember, he's part of the Bull Moose Party. Again, all these like little hidden secrets at this school in California. Now, after the Spanish-American War, they're going to sign a peace treaty. And the reason we really care about this peace treaty is because what we get from the peace treaty. If you will bracket the three next bullets, this is what we get from the treaty. So first off, there is, if you will highlight, independence in Cuba. Now, although we declare independence in Cuba, we still are going to pass an act that gives us a lot of control over Cuba. But again, in general, you have Cuba that is going to be independent. This one's a big one, though. We're going to get Puerto Rico. If you will highlight ceded Puerto Rico, we'll talk about Puerto Rico in a little bit, but I do want you to highlight the word Foraker Act. That is the actual act that gives us Puerto Rico, as well as Guam. We're going to talk about those colonies in just a little bit. And this also allowed America to, if you will highlight, purchase the Philippines from Spain. Now, this is probably the one that is the most controversial out of all of them, and we'll talk a little bit about it why. America really felt in the Philippines, like these poor Filipinos, they can't do it themselves. We need to help them have democracy in the Philippines. This is so social Darwinist of the United States. You can even put that at the end of this, social Darwinism, because really that's why we begin to acquire those territories. So why do we care about the Spanish-American War so much? If you will star the next bullet, why do we care about this? This was if you will highlight, turning points for the United States. In particular, we have, if you will highlight, colonial gains, which means we are now if you will highlight, global territorial empire. Now, there were various national movements that begin after this empire begins. In particular, we noticed that in Philippines, for example, the Philippines really tried to be able to get their independence, and America squashed those very quickly. But in general, America begins to extend its reach around the world. One of the more important ones about this is the Foraker Act. Now, the Foraker Act said that Puerto Rico was a kind of, it's a territory, but America has a whole bunch of control over it and is allowed to be able to put in a civil government. Puerto Rico, we're going to talk about in a little bit. You can actually see the word Puerto Rico right here. But you can notice that America is beginning to control its territories around the world. Now, in Cuba, this is where it gets to why Cuba doesn't like us very much. Cuba, we do what's known as the Platt Amendment. And the Platt Amendment basically said, you're an independent country, but our American military is going to control your country. It's kind of really similar to what happened in Afghanistan after 9/11. But you can see this is us branding Cuba. So Cuba just got out of this horrible situation with Spain, and now we're continuing to brand them and make them our own. Because of this, it begins the Anti-Imperialist League. Now, if you will highlight and triple star the Anti-Imperialist League, this is and if you want to put that at the end of this is the counter argument. This is the people who say we shouldn't be imperialist. You have to remember that America was, if you will highlight in the first bullet, isolationist. We did not want to get into foreign affairs. Now, all of a sudden, we're starting to get into foreign affairs. Why are we doing that? In the next bullet, the big reason why people started to be concerned, if you will highlight, is the annexation of the Philippines. Once the Philippines are annexed, people are like, we didn't need the Philippines. We weren't fighting the Philippines. We were fighting for Cuba. And by the way, shouldn't we be giving freedom to them because that's what we were fighting for? And again, this is when people start to say, this is wrong. Like, we need to get rid of these problems. So we have a lot of moral, economic, and legal problems for why people are so against what's happening over in these areas. Is this okay or not? And one of the big terms here, if you will highlight and double star, is self-determination. The American Revolution said that you have a right to determine your own government. That's what the American Revolution was. So the idea of self-determination is the idea that, if you will highlight, a nation's people should decide their own form of government. Therefore, if you will star the next sub-bullet, how can you justify imperialism if you are not going to allow these countries to create their own government? And that's a big thing here. Our countries should have the ability, and people should have the ability, to make their own form of government. Now, they also had if you will highlight, racial justification. And a lot of this comes down to the idea of social Darwinism. Now, don't be mistaken and don't say, oh, these people are like, social Darwinism is bad and they're proving all these bad people. No, they use social Darwinism to say, well, these poor people are not, if you will highlight in the thirdish bullet, not ready for or capable of democratic governments. Um, so they're arguing, not saying, hey, you're being racist against these people. Instead, they're arguing they're not ready for democracy like the Philippines. They can't handle democracy. That's unfair. So you can't give it to them. So you can see our racistness is coming out real strong in the issues here. Here are some of our major figures. Andrew Carnegie was an anti-imperialist. Mark Twain, William Jennings Bryan. You should hopefully know all these names from previously before. And again, if you will notice, we get a lot of these really great political cartoons. We have all these little devils, and we're just pumping our government full of this imperialism. This is probably one of the more famous images. There's so much imagery in here. Notice Uncle Sam is taking these social Darwinist people, and they're trying to teach them civilization. You can see it says school begins on here. Notice we have a globe of the different places around the world, but notice we have these nice little territories. Look how good these little people are. We have Texas and we have California, and these are the good kids because they are the civilized kids, and these are the bad kids. Notice, by the way, this implies the Native American still can't read. The Chinese man is left out over here, and the Black American is over here being basically the servant to everybody else. And the reality is that America wants to govern other countries and force our beliefs onto those other countries as well. Notice again in these, we show how imperialism is justified over time, but notice we get fatter and fatter and fatter as we begin to acquire different countries. And now we're super fat with those countries. Now, our next one we're going to go into is Hawaii. So I believe right now, I think we're on number 6. You should not have put a number on Anti-Imperialist League. If anything, that is the anti of what is going on at this point. But now we enter into the acquisition of Hawaii. And if you go ahead and highlight and star the word Hawaii. Now, to understand really a lot of stuff about Hawaii, we have to understand the origins of Hawaii. So Hawaii is born out of travelers and voyagers. If you've ever seen the movie Moana, that is what creates the country or the area of Hawaii. Now, basically what we do know is that these sailed ships that you can see right here are what brought the original peoples into modern day Hawaii. Now, we know that the original island is referred to as this. This is in today. I thought I had a map of it. There you go. This is in modern day Tahiti. And basically they began to voyage and eventually come along the Hawaiian Islands. Now, one legend says that the reason they came upon the Hawaiian Islands is because they saw a big black plume of smoke and thought that that plume of smoke was an island. It was not an island. It was the volcanoes going off in Hawaii. Regardless, though, that allows the Tahitians to land onto Hawaii and become or create this culture in Hawaii. Now, again, if you notice down here, though, we have a little bit of an issue because it's not like Hawaii didn't have any people on it. We don't actually know the origin of where the original people came from of Hawaii, but we do know that the Tahitians take over the original people. So these are known as the Ali'i. Those means the nobles of Hawaii. Versus these are the Minime, or sorry, that's a different person, are the commoners. So the original people of Hawaii become a lesser status compared to the other people, the Ali'i in Hawaii. In fact, these people become so ostracized from the entire country or the entire area that they're actually seen as like these creepy little leprechaun kind of things that live in caves. And so the Tahitians really just take over the Hawaiian Islands. Now, this makes them the Ali'i, and the Ali'i are the nobles. Now, they're not just nobles, these are literally God on the earth today. In fact, when you see an Ali'i, he's going to be dressed typically in these feathered garments. You cannot look at the Ali'i, and so they have these like big feathered things that as people walk that tells you the Ali'i are coming, and you must cast your eyes down and get on the floor in front of them. And if you look at the Ali'i, you are actually killed because they are such of noble birth. Now, we see a lot of things that come out of this as well. So, for example, the words ohana. A lot of times in these original Hawaiian islands, your entire extended family lived in one area. These were pluralistic families, and so many wives to single male. And so that's where the word ohana comes from, is because they all live together as one. Now, you might have heard of the word kahuna before. Kahuna was a real thing. These are the spiritual leaders of the Hawaiian Islands, and they were extremely revered and loved in these islands. There's a lot of legends of the kahuna where the kahuna would say something would happen, and it would definitely happen. And people went to them to seek advice. For example, one of my favorite stories about this is that there was two brothers that were fighting over the big island of Hawaii. One of them went to the kahuna, and the kahuna said, "If you fight this, you will die." And when he went to go fight this, the entire or not only did the kahuna said that, he said whoever survives this is the leader of the Hawaiian Islands. And so while they were fighting, a giant volcano went off and killed the brother, and the other brother survived and became the leader of the Hawaiian Islands. Now, the Hawaiian Islands are a big mythology. And by the way, if you're wondering why are we going deeper into this, we didn't get a chance to really talk about native culture in Hawaii when we did the very first lesson. So I'm just taking that opportunity right now. Now, in the Hawaiian Islands, if you've ever been to Hawaii, you know that all the gift shops have these itty bitty little statues. And these little statues are actually Hawaiian gods. So if you take them into your home, you are taking a Hawaiian god, such as the god of the sea, for example, that you can see on here. You can also see that people have, for example, the gods of war. It's always funny when I go into somebody's house and they have the god of war hanging out over there. But again, they do have a system of mythology there as well. Now, this idea of a legal system actually is from the word kapu. And if you ever watch Lilo and Stitch, there's actually a part where she slams the door and it says the word kapu on it. And the reason why that's important is because that was the legal system at the time, but the legal system was harsh. Women, for example, were not allowed to eat bananas or pig as well. These were executionable offenses. If you weren't executed, you could possibly be strangled and then left there to live, but basically be strangled for the next several days as punishment for breaking the kapu. Kapu today means stop in Hawaiian. You could also be killed, but you're not going to be killed easy. You're going to be clubbed to death if you violate the kapu laws. Now, everything changes, though, when Captain Cook comes from England. So Captain Cook arrives in the Hawaiian Islands in the late 1700s, and his idea is to Christianize the Hawaiians. Wow, this looks really similar to what everybody else has done. Now, when Captain Cook arrives, he begins to do a significant amount of missionary work, but his arrival was actually very interesting timed. Now, you're going to see a lot of interpretations of the same story, but what we do know is that they were in the middle of their biggest festival of the year. And this really big festival was a massive surfing festival that celebrated the end of the harvest. That is because the god Lono over here, who, if we go back over into our mythology right here, that is the god of agriculture. So to celebrate the god of agriculture, they have this huge festival, including today, celebrating the good harvest. Well, there was a kahuna that had said that during this festival, there would be an arrival of the actual god Lono during the festival. He would approach from the south, the god would approach from the south, and they said that he would arrive on a cloud. And so Captain Cook arrived from the south. He arrived during the festival, and his sailed ship appeared almost like a cloud, and people began to say, perhaps this is the god Alono. Now, that is the English version of the story. That is your textbook version of the story. But if you guys remember, we talked about Tenochtitlan and how our history books say that they thought he was a god. They probably didn't think that he was a god. Regardless, though, Captain Cook arrives and he begins making some changes really quickly. He tries to ban the hula as being too sexual. His men had tons of STDs and begins to interact with the Hawaiians, thus bringing STDs to the Hawaiian Islands. Things begin to go sour really quickly. So, in response, what do? They invite our boy Captain Cook over to the shore, and then they chop him up into little pieces. There's also some rumors of cannibalism, and Captain Cook is now gone. Now, this little section of Hawaii is actually British territory. It is Captain Cook's Memorial. You can go and visit it. When I visited it, there was all these British people like crying because Captain Cook died there 300 years ago. After bringing syphilis to the islands and all these other things. So it's just interesting how we kind of do this. But yes, a lot of British people will go and visit where Captain Cook had died. So now what we see is the British begin to send more people over and over again, and we begin to see the Christianization of the Hawaiian Islands. Now, what we do know, though, is that the Hawaiian Islands do begin to change as the British begin to have more impact in there. Now, these people that are coming are what are known as the Haiol. And the Haiol are going to be people that are going to be foreigners. So today, if you go to Hawaii, you are most likely a Haiol going into the Hawaiian Islands. Now, over time, eventually, the Hawaiian Islands, along with the Christianization, are going to be collectively made into a single Hawaiian nation. The original emperor, or I guess leader, king, I think it's a king, of the Hawaiian Islands is a guy named Kamehameha. And Kamehameha is going to become the uniter of the Hawaiian Islands through war, very violent war, but does unite them under one nation. Now, it's kind of interesting, though, when we start to look at some of the stories here, because the British, for example, after it is united, he allows the British to come. The British bring cows. He was so grateful for the cows that he decided to put a kapoo on the cows, which meant that you could not kill the cows. And then the cows went and destroyed all the vegetation in Hawaii. And so again, we see this weird interaction between the Europeans and the Hawaiian nations. But most importantly is the Christianization of the Hawaiian Islands. And it becomes massively, massively Christianized at this time. In fact, one of the very first temples outside of the United States for the Mormon church was in Hawaii. Now, we know that over time, more Kamehamehas are going to begin to be more and more Christianized. They begin to take more Christianized names. Notice again the difference. This is about a 20, 30-year difference between the original Kamehameha and a future Kamehameha. We're becoming more Christianized and more European in the style. Now, one problem is that in the 1830s, Hawaii becomes overly dependent on foreign trade. In particular, they had a wood called sandalwood. And if you go to Hawaii today, a lot of the goods you buy are going to be sandalwood goods. Now, the problem with sandalwood is sandalwood takes a long time to grow. However, the Europeans demanded it. And so what happened is future Kamehamehas begin to massively destroy the sandalwoods. Sandalwoods are only grown in the very, very top elevations of Hawaii. So they would make 20-mile trains of people pulling the sandalwood into the shore. Eventually, they begin to run out of sandalwood and they become massively indebted to the Europeans. One of the reasons Europeans begin to take over the Hawaiian nations is because they have a lot of economic control due to the debt that they have begun to have. As we begin to progress through the Kamehamehas, again, notice the much more European style as well of taking over. We do know that they begin to create a palace. Again, this is a monarchy in Hawaii. Iolani Palace, which you can go and visit today, is the original palace of the Hawaiian Islands and the major palace of the Kamehamehas. That actually, Iolani means royal hawk, which is why you'll see a lot of hawk symbolism all throughout the Hawaiian Islands. Now, what we begin to notice, though, is that things begin to change as go on, especially as they begin to be more and more dependent on the Europeans. So, for example, what we begin to notice is that various kings, for example, we have, for instance, I believe this is the king that banned the hula because he said that it was unchristian-like. We begin to also, for example, I'm kind of skipping through a couple of things over here just to kind of go a little bit farther. This guy actually brings back the hula. That's why he's called the People's King, because they were like, yeah, we got our hula back. So I'm just kind of skipping things for a little bit. But we do know, for example, that there's the mass Christianization, the mass Europeanization, and this begins to come to a head in the late 1800s. As a quick reminder, when we talk about European conquest, really before this time, Europe's only interaction with Hawaii was whaling expeditions. But now we have the sandalwood, now we have the sugarcane, and now people want this stop. So on your bullet where we look at the causes on here, if you will highlight a perfect trading stop, again, the Hawaiian Islands have a lot of benefits that people begin to want in the Hawaiian Islands. Now, what happens though is that we have groups that begin to take over Hawaii known as the Big Five. I would add this in the margins, the Big Five. These are the Big Five. Notice that we have our Captain Cook up in the top left. They begin to buy up a significant amount of land all throughout the Hawaiian Islands, and their controls begins to get more increased. At the same time, America begins to be concerned about Hawaii. We begin to bring a naval base there. If you will highlight in the next bullet the words military base. So a military base is established. It is known as Pearl Harbor. Yes, it is that Pearl Harbor. And again, we begin to see both American and Europeans begin to influence the Hawaiian Islands. We also see a massive increase in Asians, especially the Japanese. When the Hawaiians were done trying to be able to harvest all the sandalwood, they begin to have the Japanese do so instead, thus creating the Japanese population and the Chinese population as well. We're going to come back to this one. This is actually later on in this presentation. Now, what begins to happen, though, is at the end of the 1800s, it's like 1888, the Merry Monarch comes into power. He was known as Whiskey Bill because he was a big drinker. Now, basically, he is forced under literal threat of violence to sign what is known as the Bayonet Constitution. Now, the Bayonet Constitution basically gave all of the power to this committee known as the Committee of Safety. And shocker, the vast majority of the Committee of Safety were owners of the Big Five companies that had begun to take over all throughout the Hawaiian Islands. Notice here is the Merry Monarch being toppled over by this constitution that's being created. It's called the Bayonet Constitution because legend says they put a bayonet to his head in order to get him to sign it. Now we also begin to see, so again in the next one, if you will just highlight barbaric lives, Americans begin to be interested in Hawaii with the idea of can these Hawaiians help themselves, control themselves in Hawaii. In the next bullet, this was also a big, if you will highlight, economic opportunity for the Americans to begin to take over. Now, we begin to see again, there's a massive increased interest in Hawaii, especially in order to take over plantations and things like that in Hawaii, which brings us to Queen Liliuokalani. If you will highlight Queen Liliuokalani in the next bullet, she is the last monarch, unfortunately, of Hawaii. What happens during her reign is that we begin to see that there is a massive push for annexation. In particular, multiple planters in the area begin to go to the president at the time, Benjamin Harris, and request that they annex the Hawaiian Islands. Now, hold on, I'm trying to remember here. What begins to happen though is they begin to ask for annexation. So Benjamin Harris, the Republican, sends a person over to the Hawaiian Islands. Now, while he is in the Hawaiian Islands, this guy is massively loved by the Big Five, and in particular, this guy named Sanford Dole. Which, if you've ever had a Dole Whip before, it is that Sanford Dole. Go ahead and highlight his name in the bullet above. They are going to massively pep up this person. They pamper them, trying to get them to annex the state of Hawaii. Now, Grover Cleveland again sends another person there, and while Grover Cleveland is there, he sends somebody to say, you need to make the final decision. We can't have this pamper stuff. Make your decision. He arrives in the Big Five, massively pampers him. He returns home and he tells Grover Cleveland, do not annex Hawaii. Hawaii is an independent nation. Hawaii can handle themselves. Do not annex Hawaii. And so that is the original belief, but that is not what sticks. What begins to happen is that the Hawaiian Islands under the next president begins to be massively taken over by the American military in an attempt to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani. If you will highlight in the next bullet, if you will highlight where it says a military coup, The military coup has begun the takeover of the Hawaiian Islands. Now, what ends up happening is Queen Liliuokalani signs the treaty in Hawaii. If you notice, it says, "For myself, I would have chosen death rather to have signed it, but it was represented to me by my signing this paper, all the persons who had been arrested, all the problems in the world would immediately be released. Think of my position, sick, alone woman in prison, scarcely known who was my friend or who listened to my words only to betray me, without legal advice or friendly counsel, in the stream of blood ready to flow unless it was stayed by my pen. And that ends the monarchy in Hawaii." She is actually imprisoned in Iolani Palace. While she is in Iolani Palace, she begins to make these beautiful quotes each day as she is imprisoned, representing the problems that happened in Hawaii and including different quotes about her troubles that had happened there as well. You will notice again that we have this massive blowing up of the imperialism, again, creating the Hawaiian Islands. The Hawaiian Islands are then annexed. If you will highlight in the next bullet, it annexed the islands. And shocker, the first governor of Hawaii is, if you will highlight, Dole. Dole becomes the leader. It becomes an American territory, and America has now taken it over Hawaii. If you want to, by the way, celebrate McKinley, who annexed the Hawaiian Islands, this is also the McKinley that that Denali has been renamed. It was originally Mount McKinley, then it changed to Denali, and as of yesterday, it is now back to Mount McKinley. He is on the $500 bills. So next time you spend your $500 bills, you could think of William McKinley. Now, when they have Dole as the power, he is put as the main power over the Hawaiian Islands. They are able to send a delegate to Congress, but they're not able to vote. And they also have a territorial legislature. But the majority of the people in power were white Americans in Hawaii. Now, Queen Liliuokalani actually ends up creating a poem and a song while she is there about the problems that happened. I mention this because if you watch the movie Lilo and Stitch, they have this song. It's Aloha Oi. That is Queen Liliuokalani's cries. That's what she says is the cry to heaven when the Hawaiian Islands lost their independence. Okay, heading into, oh no. Oh, I know where this is. Okay. So heading now over into China. Now, we have to kind of understand China really quickly by understanding what is going on at this time period. Hold on. Wait. Hold on. Okay. Well, I accidentally messed up the order of this, so I will go ahead and fix it really quickly. Eek. I messed up the order. Okay. All right. So in this next one, we're going to talk next about the insular cases. Now, the insular cases, I don't even know what number we are. Let's see. 5, 6. Okay, I think we're on number 7. Highlight and double star the insular cases. Up on this, it's not going to make a ton of sense. But the insular cases is all about trying to understand the Constitution when it comes to these different territories. So again, if you will highlight the Treaty of Paris, it ended the Spanish-American War, and it gave America, if you will highlight, it granted the United States, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, and Cuba. And although Cuba was granted its independence in 1902, America now has a problem. How do we handle the cases of the problems in these territories? Now, the issue here is that the treaty, or we didn't really have anything in our Constitution that said we could have territories. So instead, the Treaty of Paris decides what we're going to do with those. Now, Spanish that were living in the territory, so original Spanish, those were known as peninsulars, and they had status which meant that they could, if you will highlight, keep Spanish citizenship or gain American citizenship. So if you were Spanish in the Spanish territories, you could gain citizenship or remain Spanish. However, if you will start the next bullet and highlight, that did not apply to natives. They were both denied Spanish citizenship and they were denied American citizenship. So there begins to be a series of lawsuits in the, if you will highlight, Supreme Court, trying to understand, if you will highlight, it addressed the legal status of overseas territories. And in particular, if you will double star the next bullet, it focused on the concept of, if you will highlight, the Constitution follows the flag. Does the U.S. Constitution follow and apply to U.S. territories? Now, in the late 1800s, people began to argue that territories are not part of the United States technically, which means constitutional protections are not guaranteed. Now, in these various court cases, they call them the insular cases because insular refers to, if you will highlight, any island territory. That's what the word insular means today. So we're looking at Puerto Rico, Guam, Hawaii, and the Philippines. Do they have the same powers as the rest of the nations? Now, the original insular cases begins with Downs v. Biddle. If you will highlight and star Downs v. Biddle. And this is an incredibly important case because basically they said that even though America owns Puerto Rico, that's where the case came from, if you will highlight, it was not part of the U.S., and therefore, if you will highlight, was not subject to the same constitutional protections. Therefore, the flag does not follow, or the Constitution does not follow the flag in all cases. So what they decide to do is they decide to make what is known as, if you will highlight, an incorporated part of the United States, and if you will highlight, an unincorporated part of the United States. Now, an incorporated territory is a territory that will most likely benefit and become a state. In these insular cases, they determined that Hawaii and Alaska were these incorporated territories. However, they determined that the other territories are, if you will highlight and double star, unincorporated territories, which means that these are not territories that are considered American territory in terms of following the flag. Now, why does this matter? If you will double star where it says most important, here are the things that matter when it comes to an unincorporated territory, which again is Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines today. If you will highlight the numbers 1 through 5, so first off, you have no federal voting power. So if you're in Puerto Rico, you don't get a vote for the president and other voting things. You can elect locally a representative to speak in the House of Representatives, but again, they have no voting power. So really, you don't have a ton of power as an unincorporated territory. You can nominate candidates, so they do participate in the Republican and Democratic conventions, but again, they can't actually vote for federal office, and they still have to pay for federal taxes. Now, the reality is that a lot of critics, and if we relook at it today, would possibly argue that this was all based on racism. In particular, the insular cases declare that anybody in these territories are, if you will highlight, alien races and highlight savage tribes. That is actually in the insular cases Supreme Court case documentation. Now, in particular, this one actually says the administration of government and justice according to Anglo-Saxon principles. That's all social Darwinism, literally in the U.S. Supreme Court case. Now, these rules are going to apply to all unincorporated territories in the United States, although the Philippines do eventually receive this. Now, one difference, though, is Puerto Rico. If you will highlight the Jones-Shafrath Act, in 1917, they did grant citizenship to Puerto Ricans, if you will highlight Puerto Ricans. They called it organized, but they did call it unincorporated. Now, part of the reason for this is it did benefit massively the two ties between the two countries. There's a ton of immigration between the two. But most importantly, if you will highlight, it provided labor during World War I. So really, why did we have them come in 1917? Because we needed soldiers in World War I. Now, today, America has 14 different territories. That the vast majority of those territories, which are the ones on the left, those are all going to be military bases, so they're not really a permanent location. Only 5 have permanent population. However, we also have to deal with the issue of birthright citizenship in these different ones. We're going to talk about birthright citizenship, by the way, in just a second. But again, 4 have birthright citizenship in the United States, but almost no constitutional rights. And America Samoa has 0 constitutional rights, and they're not even American citizens. Now, one thing that has come up recently is whether or not people do or do not want to be able to acquire statehood. By rule, they have to issue a referendum. They have to have at least 60,000 adult males. That's actually from the Northwest Ordinance. They must support the American Constitution, but most importantly, if you will highlight, it must pass through an act of Congress. This is part of the problem. So there's actually 2 areas right now that are trying to gain statehood. Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico have both passed multiple referendums trying to be able to gain statehood. The problem is Congress must approve it. The most recent one, it blazed through one house and then didn't make it in the Senate. They can become states. In fact, there's actually mock-ups that the government has made for up to 60 stars. However, it has to get through Congress first to be able to make it through. All right, now we're heading into China. So we have to contextualize this first through understanding how much America at this point hates the Chinese. And this has to do with, if you will highlight, Chinese immigration. So Chinese men had come since, if you will highlight, the gold rush. However, America begins to massively restrict through what's known as the Chinese Exclusion Act. Highlight and double star the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, in order to be able to get rid of, and you could put next to 1882 job competition, what they decided to do is they decided to pass federal legislation that, if you will highlight, suspended Chinese immigration. It also, if you will highlight, limited the civil rights and also highlight forbade naturalization, aka they can't become citizens. Now, when we talk about these limiting civil rights, that gets us into some really interesting things because, for example, California actually banned people of Chinese descent from saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Like, that's how petty they went to try to be able to hurt the Chinese. Now, one of this is really due to racism, the massive racism skyrocketing of Chinese in America. This is one of my favorite cartoons. You might notice some current eventy kind of things that come out of this, but this is from the 1800s. Again, blocking the Chinese from coming into America. The Chinese has and continued all the way up until World War II to be one of the most hated groups in America. You will notice, for example, white immigration is okay, but not Oriental, aka Asian immigration, and we are literally kicking the Chinese out. The only reason we start to like the Chinese is because of World War II, because if you are the enemy of my enemy, you are my friend. That is actually an FDR quote talking about Stalin, but same kind of thing. They're the enemies of Japan, so we like the Chinese. That brings us to one of the more important cases that actually really has a lot to do with today. And if you will highlight and star, it's the United States v. Wong. Now, the United States v. Wong has to do with this guy. This is Wong. He's 27 years old. And he is an American born citizen. Now, he was born to two Chinese parents who are Chinese nationals. They are not American citizens, but he is born in California. Now, he decides to leave the state and go to China for a couple months or a couple years. And he returns to the United States and he is denied based on the Chinese Exclusion Act. And they argued that the Chinese Exclusion Act said that he could not be an American citizen. Now, instead, in the U.S. Supreme Court case of Wong, United States v. Wong, if you will highlight, it focuses on the highlight 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause, which has to do with, if you will highlight, natural born citizens. And the Supreme Court actually shockingly sided with him, which stated that he is considered naturally born in the United States, even though he has Chinese citizens as parents. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because the whole idea of natural born citizenship is very unique to the United States. All the red states are by blood. So if your parents were citizens, you're a citizen. But in the United States, we have natural born citizenship based on if you are here. Now, you might care about this because a couple of weeks ago, President Trump issued an executive order. And this executive order specifically said that they were going to address problems with undocumented migrants having children in America. Now, if you notice here, he references the 14th Amendment and he actually references Dred Scott. I'll give it to President Trump. He knows Dred Scott. That's a good thing that he knows some history. But if you notice in here, he basically says Dred Scott addressed the issue of citizenship. Like the Supreme Court has addressed it before. However, the 14th Amendment was never intended to specifically extend citizenship to everyone born in the United States. In particular, there's a phrase called subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And this is going to be the main problem here. Does that apply to undocumented citizens? Now, this executive order has been blocked. The third time happened about 3 days ago. It will go to the U.S. Supreme Court, I'm sure, to decide whether or not the 14th Amendment is or is not fully constitutional. But this is what they argue. So they say the fact, therefore, that acts of Congress or treaties have not permitted China. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, okay. Sorry. It's late. It's 11 o'clock. So this is actually from the original Supreme Court case of Wong v. United States. And you will notice in here that they say that basically they cannot exclude somebody simply because they have Chinese parents. All persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. But this is that problem, subject to the jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means what they have control. Now, what President Trump has said, so this is in the dissent. So this is the guy that disagreed in US v. Wong, and he basically says that if you are of your native government, you are considered an alien. If you have any allegiance to China, you are considered an alien and therefore should not have natural born citizenship. So, this is what the Justice Department is saying. They are saying basically that according to the 14th Amendment, the subject of jurisdiction does not apply to undocumented migrants, and therefore it excludes children of non citizens here illegally or temporary citizens. They also say that in particular, this is from the Civil Rights Act of 1866, that said that you cannot be subject to any foreign power. Therefore, if your parents have foreign power or you are tied some way to a foreign power, you also do not gain citizenship. Here's what I would tell you. It's going to have to go to court. We're going to have to see what happens. I would be surprised if the 14th Amendment is overturned, but who knows? We will see. Now, in terms of China, they also undergo what's known as the open door policy. The cause of this, if you will highlight, is an increased demand for resources. So, America in particular is going to have a ton of raw materials that they want to send to other places, and people want to acquire it as well. They also wanted to, if you will highlight, expand trade to China in order to gain, if you will highlight, new markets. And because laissez faire existed, it would be very cheap to go abroad. So, following the Spanish American War, America begins to be more interested in Asia. In particular, William McKinley wants to create, if you will highlight, an open door to China to allow all trading nations access. Now, this is a big difference. So, he considers this open door policy that they should open up the door to China to everyone. By the way, I don't even know what number we're on. Just put whatever number is next under China and the open door policy where we're at right now. So what begins to happen is he has John Hay, who is the Secretary of State, I believe. If you'll highlight his name, he sends, if you will highlight, diplomatic letters. And the goal of this was to, if you will highlight, encourage major European nations to support equal trading with everyone. So they begin this open door policy. It allows trade to open instead of competing for China. Everybody trades with China, thus opening China up into the world. Now, all of this kind of comes up to this idea of big stick diplomacy. If you will highlight in triple star, big dicks. I did not say what I just said, but I am not redoing an hour lecture. Okay, big stick diplomacy. Big stick diplomacy. Oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Okay, so we have our boy, President Theodore Roosevelt. If you will highlight President Theodore Roosevelt. And President Theodore Roosevelt famously had a phrase that he called, if you will highlight, speak softly and carry a big stick. Now, you will notice in a whole bunch of his cartoons that you will see him carrying a big stick. And here's what he says: you speak softly, you speak kindly, but if you need it, we will carry a big stick and we will hunt you down. That is America's point of view at this point. So notice, for example, we have the big stick in the Caribbean Sea where he's going to walk around and take over whatever he needs. This also leads to the idea known as the world's policeman. If you will highlight the world's policeman, the world's policeman is the idea that America should be the, if you will highlight, America being the policeman of the hemisphere in order to protect, if you will highlight, the Western Hemisphere's best interest. So basically, Theodore Roosevelt is going to say it is our responsibility to police the world. There's all these people over in all these different countries that, have problems. We need to help them be policed. Now, this is one of the reasons why we go into Ukraine. This is one of the reasons we go into the Middle East. We say that other countries do not have what they need, so we need to go and police them in order to keep them safe over in these other countries. Now, I mentioned this because 2 days ago, I was scrolling through the Twitter and I saw a post from Elon Musk come up. I'm pretty sure, I think everybody gets those. I don't know. My husband does too. I think we're just required to follow him. But it said something very interesting because it linked one of our Utah senators, and that senator is Mike Lee. And if you notice, he said, we're not the world's policemen. We have to refocus on protecting America, because this is arguing America should not be responsible for going into other countries and helping them fight their wars. That's one of the reasons why President Trump just recently said that we are withdrawing all funding from Ukraine. That's billions of dollars in the war with Russia. Because it's not our job. Why do we have to go protect Ukraine? We are no longer the world's policeman. So this is the biggest thing. Is it our job to go abroad? And again, make sure you put, I don't know what number we're on, but it's something important. That leads us to the Roosevelt corollary, which is our next one. Go ahead and add that in as well, whatever number it is. Theodore Roosevelt is going to use the concept of the Monroe Doctrine, if you will highlight the Monroe Doctrine. And he's going to argue that the Monroe Doctrine is going to stop all Europeans from being involved in America. So we're going to protect America from Europe by using military force. Now, notice I said in here that it's protecting Americas from Europe, but it's not protecting them from America. In particular, this happens with, if you will highlight, Venezuela. And because Venezuela is getting into economic trouble with Europe, America decides to states that, if you will highlight, America can intervene in regional countries to ensure their nations did their duty. So America can go to Venezuela and say, pay back your debtors, while also preventing Europe from coming into the Americas. If you will star the next bullet, this results in the United States using military force, highlight military force, to restore internal stability in these different nations. Finishing up right now, we then have the Panama Canal. Put whatever number is next on the Panama Canal. Because the Roosevelt corollary says that we can become involved, we decided to become involved in trade. We wanted to increase trade in America and decrease costs of shipping from the East Coast to Asia. And so we created a canal. So rather than going all the way down to the bottom of South America, we're going to cut through the country of Panama. Now, this Panama Canal is incredibly important to trade. Make sure you just highlight the word trade on here. And it allows America to go and take their ships. Now, if you don't know, the Panama Canal is on a lock system, which means that you have to go up and then down. It takes about 24 hours to fully get through the lock system, but it massively decreases costs as trade time begins to go down. And this is what the Panama Canal looks like today. And again, fulfilling Alfred Thayer Mahan's goal of creating a canal in Central America. Finishing up really quickly, we have gentleman's agreement. I would just make sure to highlight Japanese. Put whatever number is next to this. America begins to be concerned about Japan because Japan is causing job competition. So America decides to enter into an agreement with Japan that ends, if you will highlight, it ends segregated schools in California. However, if you will highlight, Japan begins to limit immigration into the United States. So again, we have gotten rid of the Chinese Exclusion Act. We've now gotten rid of the Japanese in the gentleman's agreement. The last thing that we're going to talk about really quickly is Taft, William Howard Taft, the largest physical president of all the presidents. He decides to say that he's going to go abroad in order to be able to help the commercial interests. He decides to use America's military to go abroad. We called this, if you will, again, highlight and star dollar diplomacy if you haven't already. Basically, this said that if we need to protect the dollar, we can go into other countries. However, this, if you will circle or highlight the word failed, which again, this system failed because it didn't stop problems from happening in other countries, and therefore American expansion did not continue to increase. All right, well, you've been with me for an hour and 6 minutes, or however long it's going to be. Thanks for being here. I will see you, for me, in 5 minutes when we do our lecture on World War I.